Hey friends, tonight you don't need bright city lights or the noise of the world around you. Let me take you somewhere quieter, a place where history whispers from the edges of the map. Tonight, we'll talk about medieval peasants, people without crowns, without horses, who lived through hunger, disease, and days that felt like they would never end. If this story brings you peace, feel free to hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly feel calm. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It's a quiet kind of magic, knowing that someone, somewhere, is falling asleep to this very story. So turn off the lights, pull up your blanket, and let's step into a nameless village where time slows down, and the world, though small, holds so much meaning. The village lay nestled in a valley, not large enough for anyone to fight over, and certainly not important enough for anyone to bother drawing on a map. There was no gate, no sign, and absolutely no one blew a horn when you arrived. If you stumbled into it, chances are, you were truly lost. Everything in the village leaned a little. The rooftops sagged as if weary of life. The walls bulged out slightly, like they were trying to exhale after a long winter. And the floors, most definitely not flat, but they had hardened over the years, by familiar footsteps, by mud, and by harvests that didn't go as planned. No one remembered who built the first house. They only knew it was patched together from whatever the wind hadn't managed to blow away. Mud, straw, young timber, and sometimes even whispered prayers. The roof was thatched. It seemed cozy at first, until the rains came, and you started placing buckets in places you never thought you'd need buckets. Inside, there weren't many options for decor. One room, maybe two, if someone was feeling ambitious and had a few extra planks. It was where you ate, slept, mended clothes, argued, and made peace, all within the tight embrace of those crooked walls. No refrigerator, no private rooms. If you wanted silence, you went to the fields. And if you wanted warmth, you came home. To where there might be a fire, and a goat sleeping in the corner. Sleep wasn't like it is today. There was no memory foam, no meditation apps, just straw, and a hope that it was dry. People slept together, family, relatives, even chickens. Yes, chickens, because they held heat better than you might think. You might get kicked in the back, snored at in the ear, or stepped on by a cat in the middle of the night. But you learned to sleep through it all, or at least keep your eyes closed until morning. The windows had no glass, just holes in the wall with loose wooden shutters. Wind came in freely, like a member of the household, uninvited, but no one tried to stop it. Sometimes animals came in too. A lost owl, a curious fox. You learned not to be startled by nighttime noises, as long as they weren't human footsteps. Cooking. Let's just call it solving the survival equation. There was no menu, no recipe, only one pot, affectionately called the magic pot, because anything could be thrown in and somehow still become dinner. The stew never really ended. It just kept going, with new things added each day, skimmed each night, and a silent hope that nothing had come back to life in the morning. Bread was sacred, Not soft, not fluffy, and absolutely no butter. It resembled a geometric brick, something you could eat, or use as a weapon if needed. But when dipped into stew, even just catching a glimmer of floating fat, it became a miniature festival in your mouth. People ate in silence. Everyone counted every bite. The drink of choice wasn't wine. It was small ale, a weak beer, low in alcohol, but strong enough to kill bacteria. Kids drank it. Adults drank it. Your grandma drank it. In other words, everyone was just a little relaxed, but not too relaxed to rise with the sun. Speaking of sunrise, people didn't wake up to alarms. They woke to the light cutting through gaps in the roof and landing straight on their faces. A medieval morning began with the crow of a rooster, the crackle of firewood, and groans about another night that felt too short. And then came footsteps, dragging toward the fields where dreams were left behind and shovels took their place. Once in a while, if you were lucky, a stranger would pass through the village. A monk, a trader, a storyteller. They might bring news from the city, rumors of a new king, or perhaps just an old tale no one here had heard before. Those stories were treasured like gold. They were told and retold all winter. Quiet little dreams tucked gently into the night. And so it went, day after day. No revolutions, no miracles. Just patience, simple meals, thatched houses, and people, living quietly, but never truly vanishing. You see, not all history is written in blood and steel. Some of it is written in mud, straw, sweat, and endurance, and sometimes those little things are what keep the world turning through the night. Would you like to hear the next part? If so, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment, so I know you're still awake and listening from somewhere out there. You live in a small village, tucked into a misty valley where earth and sky seem to blur into one another. No map marks this place. Then again, you don't really need a map. Your world ends at the edge of the fields, where ancient trees stand like weathered sentinels, watching in silence. All around are patches of lumpy soil, green mingling with brown, where you sweat until the sun disappears. There's a river somewhere out there in the distance. You've never seen it, but you've heard of it in reverent tones, as if someone were speaking of legend. This is where you were born. And perhaps, just a few steps from here, is where you'll leave it. Your village has no borders, no walls, and no one is quite sure where it fits inside the vast feudal puzzle. Boundaries are measured by trees, as in, walk past the old elm, then turn where the ground turns to mush. Not official, but understood. And understanding is enough. Disputes over land? Of course, but usually settled with a short argument, a shrug, and sometimes a loaf of bread passed around 3 times, until no one remembers what they were even arguing about. Justice doesn't come from courts. It comes from mutual exhaustion. The village elder, if you can call him that, is named Tom, an old man with a beard like a hedge who walks with a slight lean to the left, a limp gifted by a goat in his youth. He once spoke with a wandering monk, and ever since, whenever a problem comes up, Tom starts with, "When I spoke with that monk," and ends with something vague and unhelpful. But he has a hut that hasn't collapsed and a goat that still has teeth. And that, around here, qualifies as leadership. There's no school, no tavern, nowhere to gather, unless you count the compost heap as a cultural center. Children learn to read the wind. They measure time by the shadow under their feet, and they learn which neighbors return borrowed tools and which never do. If a stranger arrives in the village, as rare as a dry October afternoon, people will talk about it for a week. Did he smell like salt? His sleeves were longer than usual. Why didn't he bow when passing the half-burnt church from the next village? Strangeness is both exciting and suspicious, and sometimes a little dangerous. No one leaves the village, not because they're trapped, but because no one sees a reason to go. Even if you wanted to, leaving is more complicated than you think. You don't know the dialects out there. You have no coins. You don't know the customs. And you don't know how old you are. Not because you're eternally young, but because no one's ever counted. The world beyond the hills sounds like folklore. Stone buildings, shops that sell spices, and roads that don't turn to soup when it rains. Sounds nice. But you've also heard that out there people shake hands with their left, eat soup with red wooden spoons, and never mention goats during dinner. That's enough to make you turn back and keep stirring your pot. Life here doesn't have much drama. No dragons, just rats. No wars, just winter. And winter doesn't need to declare itself. It simply arrives, moves into your home, and stays, like a sickly aunt who visits and never leaves. You learn to live with it, like you learn to live with Grandpa's snoring and the aching knee that flares up out of season. Every day is the same, but not in a dull way, like an old song you've heard 100 times and still find something new in each verse. A different hint of smoke in the air, a strange breeze from the forest, a peculiar dream where you fly without wings. But really, you don't have time to get bored. There's land to till, thatch to patch, stew to stir, and someone always needing to borrow something. Occasionally, news drifts in from far away. A king has died. A war has started. A strange comet has appeared. A sign of the world's end, or maybe just an early autumn. But you don't worry much. You've never met a king. And comets don't keep the bread from burning when you forget to check the fire. Everything here is understood without saying. Who'll help fix your fence? Who trades eggs for wool? Who laughs at your old stories? No signatures, no contracts, just a nod and silence. The kind of silence that feels like rain after a hot day. You're not alone. You live among kin, neighbors, and animals that will listen, if you know how to whisper. You don't need gilded churches to feel something sacred. Just a smoky hearth and a chicken that cries out from a dream. And every day that passes isn't a failure. It's a quiet triumph. No flags are raised. No one cheers. But you know, one more day, the house is still standing, the stew didn't burn, and the goat hasn't eaten the laundry line. That's the real miracle. That's history without heroes, just people who didn't give up. Your home isn't a castle. It's made of mud, straw, and tightly woven branches. A quiet challenge to wind and rain, and sometimes wind and rain win. The thatched roof sags like an old woman bowed in quiet endurance. It leaks, always, and somehow always in the exact spot you can't reach, even when you've balanced a wobbly stool on top of a crooked log, braced with a broken broomstick. The whole house leans. Tufts of straw fall like exhausted sighs. But by some strange miracle, it has survived 3 winters and 2 of the thunder god's worst tempers. The smell inside is a medieval symphony. Damp wool, wood smoke, sweat, and a touch of soil that has soaked into your bones. It's not a smell you can wash out, nor one you can hide from. You carry it like a kind of survival perfume. No bottle required, stronger than any noble cologne. Your walls weren't built. They were patched. With straw, with earth, and with promises like, "I'll fix that properly next time." Of course, that promise wears thin, just like the old shirt you stuffed into the drafty hole near the window. The window, if you can call it that, is a face-sized hole with a wooden flap that shuts with a creak, like a cat in a bad mood. Glass? Oh no, glass is for churches or castles. Here, wind is a permanent resident, and the rooster crowing beside your ear is your natural alarm clock. No snooze button included. The floor? It's dirt. Not fired brick or polished hardwood like in those movies. Just earth. Hardened, maybe, from enough feet stepping over it for enough years. If you're lucky, there's a layer of hay or straw to give the illusion of cushioning, but only an illusion. Come rainy season, you rediscover the floor's true nature, a friendly swamp where every step makes a soft, sticky squelch. And the footprints? Well, they might be yours. Or the goat's. Ah, yes, the goat. You share your house with it, with chickens, sometimes even a cow if it's too cold outside and the barn's leaking, as if the house weren't. Animals aren't just company. They're roommates, bedmates, occasionally moochers. Every morning, you chase the chicken out of the kitchen where it slept soundly on the warm ash pile, wearing a look that says, "This is better than your bed, and you know it." The kitchen? It's a corner with a fire pit, blackened with smoke, often so thick you're not sure whether you're making soup or steaming your face. Chimney? No. Smoke finds its own way out, usually through the spot where you sleep, or where you hang your freshly washed shirt, resulting in a fragrance best described as ash and resignation. The pot, lovingly called the everything pot, is always boiling. Not because you love cooking, but because if it cools down, everything in it might grow legs, grow beards, and declare independence. It holds everything. Vegetables that still breathe, bones that barely remember meat, weeds picked from the fence, and rainwater scooped from the gutter, if the well's dry. The only seasoning is hope. Sleep? It's not rest. It's a pause. You sleep with everyone. Parents, siblings, children, even the goat. Not out of love, but because it's cold. Warmth is a precious resource, and a damp wool blanket won't save you if you sleep alone. Snoring is background music. Shifting is just another sound effect. And if someone kicks you in the ribs mid-sleep, well, it's just traditional courtesy. Outside the house, the road to the village isn't really a road. It's a dent in the earth left by ox carts, filled with water all year round. Mosquitoes live there like landlords. happily welcoming any bare foot with a free plasma buffet. You avoid the road unless you must, or unless you've grown so used to it that you no longer care. Sometimes you place boards across it. Slip once, remember it all season. No one important ever passes through. If a stranger arrives, it's an event, like a comet. People watch him like he's a unicorn, part suspicion, part fascination, part fear that he's bringing plague or strange ideas like new taxes. They talk about it for weeks. Sometimes they even make up a folk song, if anyone remembers what music is. And you're still here, under your leaking thatched roof, on your muddy floor, beside a chicken trying to wrestle the cat for the warm spot on your bed. You don't live because you're waiting for something grand. You live because there's a pot to stir, a roof to mend, and a morning waiting to begin by chasing the chicken out of the soup. Your day begins when the sun rises, not with the blaring of an alarm clock, but with the half-hearted crow of a rooster and a sliver of light sneaking through the straw in the roof, just bright enough to wake you, but never kind enough to make you glad about it. You sit up, your back groaning like it just lost a fight with a pile of firewood. And honestly, it kind of did. You chopped wood yesterday. You don't measure time in minutes or hours. You measure it by light, the yellow of morning, the pale white of summer noon, and the muddy gray of a rainy afternoon. Or you measure it by pain, knees creaking mid-morning, back aching near noon, and eyes blurring around dusk. Sometimes, if the wind is just right, you might catch the faint tolling of a bell from the village beyond the woods, a quiet reminder that time passes, even when you have nothing to do but keep surviving. The village has about 15 families. Not many, but enough to make a decent crowd on feast days, and a very loud one if someone loses someone else's goat. Everyone knows each other, names, voices, whose footsteps squish through the mud, and even the things people wish no one knew. But they don't gossip the way you might think. There's no time for that. And no one's skilled enough to keep secrets for long anyway. Secrets leak like a roof, starting as a damp patch, then spreading everywhere. But instead of an uproar, people respond with silence. A sort of collective, polite, efficient silence, until the problem becomes impossible to ignore. Like when the neighbor's rooster ruins everyone's nap with a horrifying midday concerto. The village is led by a man named John. He's not tall, not noble-looking, has no sword or grand cloak. What he does have is an old hat, a dull axe, and an impressive ability to just happen to be there without ever actually doing much. But he once spoke with a monk, once, and tells the story like he once shared tea with a king. Each retelling adds a new detail, like, he looked at me and said I had the eyes of a leader, though no one remembers if the monk is even still alive. No one opposes John, not out of obedience, but because his house hasn't collapsed, and his cow is still alive. In a village where everything leans, rots, leaks, and could fall at any moment. That's a pretty big deal. There's an unspoken rule. If your roof still stands, and your cow hasn't tipped over, you've earned the right to speak at the meeting. There's no council, no minutes recorded. Meetings happen around a long log or beside the well. People share opinions by chewing slower or staying silent longer than usual. And John, calm as a cold hearth, ends every discussion with something philosophical like, "Well, seems like that's what the heavens want, and that's that. No votes, no applause. Just a slow dispersal back to chores, everyone pretending they were convinced." Sometimes someone disagrees, but disagreement here means furrowing your brow slightly deeper or shaking your head on the walk home. That's the peak of rebellion in this village. On feast days, people gather, bringing stew that's been boiling far too long, bread hard enough to be classified as weaponry, and stories as old as the fence post at the edge of town. They drink thin ale, dance to something no one remembers the name of, and sing songs that may or may not be about harvest, or that one guy who once fell into the well. The children run wild, mud on their legs, grass in their teeth, and eyes shining as if the world is made solely of opportunities to get dirtier. The adults watch with a mix of fatigue and an unnamed joy. Even with swollen ankles and no teeth left for chewing, they still smile. Because when the year is full of days that feel exactly the same, even a slightly different day is worth more than gold. After the feast, everyone returns to their slanted homes. You sit down, pull out a piece of bread hard as flint, and gnaw at it like it's a reward. The cat curls up, the cow snorts in the corner, and you listen to the soft wind threading through the thatched roof, as if whispering, "One more day down." Out here, nothing is precise. There are no maps, no documents, no records tucked into wooden drawers sealed with red wax. Land isn't measured with chains or stone markers. It's measured with memory. Turn left at the old oak, or right where Mr. Martin's dog likes to nap. Simple, effective, and utterly useless if you're a stranger. The boundary between one patch of land and another is drawn in tradition. A soft streak of mud, a low bush, or the worn groove left behind by goats all winter. No one really knows exactly where things begin or end, but everyone's convinced they're right. That is, until someone digs up potatoes too close to the fence. Then you don't call a lawyer. You bring a loaf of bread, shrug, and call it peace. There's a very particular kind of justice here. No written laws, only the rule that whoever remembers the oldest story wins. No formal court, just a fence post to lean against and whisper over. And when someone says, "Your grandfather was digging there too, wasn't he?" that's usually the end of it. Not because it's resolved, but because no one has the energy to keep going. There's no school. Children learn by watching, mimicking, and occasionally by falling. Hard. No blackboards, no chalk, just blistered hands from holding the hoe wrong, and that educational look from your mother. The best students are the ones who know how to dodge cow dung and remember which weeds not to eat. There's no tavern. If you want to drink, you brew it. If you want to get tipsy, you need patience. And if you want to tell stories, you wait for a festival, or at the very least, until someone drops a bucket of water. People gather by the fire, passing around weak ale that tastes like well water, trading gentle jabs like, "How many kale stalks did you grow this year?" "One and a wish." There's no inn. If a stranger arrives, they sleep on someone's floor, between scratchy straw blankets and the snoring of an uncle who survived too many winters. A stranger isn't just a guest. They're an event, a legend in the making, either once they leave or sometimes the moment they arrive. A stranger walking into the village is a big deal, big enough for the roosters to stop crowing mid-note, big enough for the entire village to talk about it for weeks. Where did they come from? What did they bring? Are they cursed? Do they smell like salt? And why are they wearing shoes that aren't muddy? Children stare at them like they stepped out of a fairy tale. The adults? Cautious, half curious, half wary. No one hates them, but no one quite trusts them either. Someone whispers that the stranger brought a mirror. A mirror. Something that lets you see yourself clearly. Which, honestly, most villagers aren't sure they want to do right now. Of course you're curious, but you're also afraid. Because the outside world, with its castles, cities, wide rivers, and tales no one can verify, is both enchanting and full of traps. You've heard of roads paved with stone that don't turn to mud in the rain, which sounds more suspicious than actual magic. Of places that sell white bread, soft, fragrant, that doesn't need to be dunked in 3-day-old stew. It all sounds unlikely. The outside world also brings trouble. Plague, new taxes, and rumors of war. Strangers might carry all of that, along with a confusing smile and clean shoes. They make you feel like your world, the one you live in, is a tiny piece that doesn't even make it onto the big map. And that, honestly, makes it just a little harder to sleep. But then, the stranger leaves. The old road goes quiet again. Their story is embroidered a bit more. Maybe they were a royal messenger, a mysterious trader, or a disguised sorcerer. No one knows. And it doesn't matter. Because the bread still needs baking, the wheat still needs harvesting, and the chicken coop door still needs fixing for the 3rd time this week. Third. If you're still listening, thank you for staying with us on this quiet little visit to a nameless village. You don't need papers or a map to get here, just your imagination, and a bit of patience to walk through a land where borders are drawn by hand and arguments end with bread. Now leave us a comment. If a stranger walked into your village today, what's the first thing you'd ask them? You never really leave the village. Not because you're forbidden to, and not because there's a locked gate. Because, well, there is no gate. There's no fence around the village, just the forest. And that is far more intimidating. The idea of a journey feels like a tale about a dragon who speaks Latin or a witch with tax records. Someone once said that far to the north, there's a city where walls are made of white stone and houses rise 3 stories tall. 3 stories. You look up at your thatched roof, and even a 2nd floor feels like science fiction. Those stories sound like dreams someone dropped along the way. They're not real, but you still tell them on cold nights, beside a bland pot of stew and a bunch of curious kids. Because sometimes the things that aren't real help you forget the very real crack in your knee that keeps reminding you of the truth. The forest wraps around the village like a heavy blanket, not to keep you warm, but to warn you. It's dark, damp, and filled with sounds that never repeat. Something knocks on a tree root at midnight? You don't ask. You hear a howl echo through the dark, You pull the blanket over your head and pretend it's just the wind. The forest isn't for exploring. It marks the edge between us and whatever's worse. The road, if you can call that muddy scar a road, leads away from the village and straight into the place no one wants to speak of. Every bend is a mystery. Every tree is a trap. They say if you go too far, you'll find bandits. And if you don't find bandits, you'll get lost. And if you don't get lost, you'll find something even worse. A town with rules you don't understand and bread you can't afford. Because you don't have coins. You've never seen more than 3 at once. Money slips through your fingers like smoke. There for a moment, then gone. Here, trade happens with turnips, bread, or promises to help fix the roof after the next storm. You don't buy, you barter. And the outside world, they don't like to barter. They like to count. You don't speak their dialect either. Your language is the whisper by the well, the soft scolding when a chicken runs into the kitchen, and the phrase, "It's raining," spoken in 3 different tones, depending on how hard it's falling. In other places, they use different words, longer, fancier ones, usually strung together in sentences that seem designed to ask for more taxes. You don't know their customs. Maybe they clap after dinner. Maybe they bow to cats before entering a house. Maybe they eat bread with spoons. You don't want to be the weird one who chews bread wrong. Here, everything is familiar. The leaning fences, the lopsided woodpile, the leaky roof. And somehow, that messiness makes you feel safe. You find comfort in things that seem small. The smell of damp wood in the corner, the crooked fence that hasn't fallen yet, and the sky. The sky is your calendar. When it turns ash gray, you know it's time for a thicker cloak. When it's a strange shade of blue, you brace yourself. Could be a windstorm, or it could mean Widow Marjorie's about to lose her mind again. Your world is the well at the village center, the patch of earth behind your house, the cow who knows when dinner's coming, and the crack on the wall you've stared at through 3 winters. You don't need to go anywhere to know what matters, because what matters isn't out there in the strange and distant. It's in the bucket you pull up every morning, and in knowing which rooster crows off beat. Leaving isn't the goal. Staying is the art. You stay to fix the roof before the rains return, to move the chicken off the hearth before it sets half the wall on fire again. You stay because your granddaughter needs to learn how to weave baskets, because your grandmother needs someone to tell her when the weather's shifting, and because if you don't make the stew, no one's going to remember the garlic. And somehow, staying doesn't make you weak. It makes you stubborn, in the best way. Because in a world that constantly tells you to move, to dream bigger, to go farther, sometimes, choosing to stay, to keep going, to quietly patch one more layer of mud onto your straw roof, is a kind of bravery. Are you still awake? If you are, tell me. Where are you listening from? Have you ever stood at the edge of your own village road? Did you go? Or did you stay? Wherever you are, in a 3-story city or a little room beneath an imaginary thatched roof, I hope you found a bit of peace in this story. So pull the blanket up, listen to the wind whisper outside the window, and remember, sometimes Staying is how we protect what matters most. Your life is a cycle on repeat. There's no start button, no end credits, just a loop, round and tight like a hand-woven basket. No bottom, only the circle. You wake up with the light, not because an alarm rings, but because the first sunbeam slips through the thatched roof like a gentle reminder. Come on, it's time for the fields. You sleep when the dark drapes itself over the village. Not because Netflix asks, "Are you still watching?" but because the firewood has burned down, the roosters have gone quiet, and there's nothing left to do but pull some straw over your shoulders and listen to the quiet breath of the cow curled in the corner. Between those two moments, you work, without stopping, without complaining. You just do. There's nothing glamorous, no Saturday night out, no Monday blues. There are rainy days, clammy days, days when the wind smacks the back of your neck and you mutter something like, "Sure is cold," just to remind yourself you're still here. But inside that steady rhythm, there's something almost peaceful, as if this life, unchanging as it is, still gives you just enough to not fall apart. You know where the firewood is stacked, usually closest to the leakiest part of the house. You know who to ask when the fence falls down, not because they're the best, but because they won't say no right away. You know when to bring the cow inside, not from a weather report, but because your cat suddenly starts looking for a dry place to nap. Those tiny signs, the change in wind, the smell of damp soil, the odd way the chickens sound, they're your daily bulletin. No one reads it out loud. No one explains it. But you understand. News of war or kings doesn't come by letter or screen. It comes in whispers. A traveler might pass through, a merchant, maybe just a wanderer, mumbling something about a new king or troops in the west. You nod, not because you understand, but because you know that news will die at the village edge like seeds tossed on stone. That kind of news is like early autumn leaves, falling quietly, beautifully, then sinking into the mud. You hear it, but don't hold on to it. Because when your hoe sits crooked in your hands, when the stew starts to smell strange, which king sits on a throne matters far less than who's bringing onions back from the market. Time here doesn't pass in years. No one says, back in 1322. They say, the year the black mold took the wheat, or the spring our goat had 3 babies. Years are too abstract. Seasons are different. The dry one, the wet one, the moldy one, the one with the mouse plague, the one so good even grumpy old Martin smiled. You measure life by how many times the well ran dry, how many times the roof caved in just a little and was patched with straw and hope. You count happiness not in coins, but in the days when the stew had meat. And when a harvest goes well, that day is worth celebrating, not with fireworks, with a loaf of bread that has a little less crust than usual. That's a real festival. Sometimes you wonder, is anyone writing this life down? The aches in your back when the cold creeps in? The way a distant bell rings out like magic just when you feel too tired to go on? Probably not. But still, you live, you work, you continue that looping rhythm. Not because someone's watching, but because you've learned how to live this way. There are no prizes, no medals. Just the quiet relief of finishing a day with no crushed fingers, a roof that didn't blow off, and a stew that didn't burn. That's what success looks like here. A definition so simple that if you told someone from far away, they'd ask, "So what about your dreams?" You'd laugh. Dreams? A dream is having enough firewood for winter, a cow that doesn't bloat, a daughter who doesn't cough too much at night, a kid who learns to tie his shoes. Dreams aren't castles. They're roofs that don't leak onto your pillow. And if that dream comes true, you're the richest soul in the village. The church isn't just a place for prayer. Here, it's the heartbeat of the village, slow, steady, and slightly aching if you listen closely. It's not grand, not radiant. There are no spires touching the clouds, no stained glass glowing like jewels. Just a cold stone house, wind hissing through the cracks in the door, and a bell that may or may not ring, depending on whether the rope is still intact or has been chewed through by mice. The priest is the only person who can read, which makes him both deeply respected and just a little intimidating. He's the keeper of mysteries, the mysteries of heaven and earth, of the farming calendar, of the tale about a man nailed to wood to save the world, and of why cats are not allowed in church. No one's certain if that last one is in the Bible, but if the priest says so, you don't argue. You kneel in the church on Sunday morning, your knees pressed against stone that never quite dries. Latin echoes off the stone walls, foreign and soaring like birds you'll never catch. You don't understand, but you believe. You believe that somehow those same phrases, repeated week after week, can turn bread into flesh and wine into something more than grape juice saved for special days. It's not a miracle you see, it's a miracle you feel. Like the way you sense spring is coming by the smell of wet soil. No one has to explain it. The church divides the year into parts with strange names: Lent, Easter, Michaelmas, All Saints' Day. You don't need to know the exact dates, just that Holy Week is near, which is enough to understand that you should avoid meat, pray more, and stop cursing. At least while inside the church. It tells you what to eat, and more importantly, when not to eat. On Fridays, you switch from meat stew to stew without meat, which means broth with vegetables. Lent is a long season of organized hunger, as if the church feels you need reminders about suffering, even though your stew has been doing that on its own every night. But even with an empty stomach, you still give your tithe. 1/10. Wheat, eggs, wool, the most valuable things you have. You hand them to the priest, or to the man who keeps records for him, with a strained smile. Not because you're happy, but because you hope heaven will remember you. Even if God doesn't recall your name, maybe he'll remember you gave eggs. And they were pretty fresh. The church is where you're emptied, but also where you receive something no other place offers: stories. Stories of saints who suffered more than you, burned alive, beheaded, thrown to lions, and still prayed. Stories of angels descending, of a young girl named Mary who said yes to her fate, of blind men seeing again with a single touch. These tales don't fill your stomach, but they help you endure hunger with a little more purpose. The priest tells these stories in a flat, steady voice, sometimes pausing to cough or to glare at the children in the back row breaking their bread too loudly. You don't remember all the details, but you remember the feeling. That even though your life is full of mud, rain, and stew that sometimes smells like mildew, somewhere, someone had it worse, and still made it to heaven. That's why you go on. Because someone once said, "The meek shall inherit the earth." You're not sure when, but that line sounds nicer than, "The strong will take all the chickens." And when your child is sick, when your crops fail, when you wake up with a cold that digs into your bones, and you see no reason to step out of bed, you go to church, not to complain, but to sit there in the dim light while wind whistles around the windows and think, maybe God is testing me. A phrase so convenient, it fits every kind of failure. You don't argue with God. You don't really talk to him either. But you whisper. You murmur the name of Saint Isidore, because someone said he helps with the harvest. You light a candle for your cow, because a neighbor swore it worked once, back in the year the black wheat got sick. And that's enough. A flickering flame in the corner of the church. A prayer whispered once again. A stale loaf of bread split 3 ways. All of it adding up to the one thing you still have when everything else has been taken. Hope. Illness in the Middle Ages wasn't like illness today. It didn't come with a warning, didn't ask for your insurance card, and certainly didn't wait for a free spot in your schedule. It arrived quietly, unapologetically, like someone who knew the way, knocked without invitation, and then settled in for as long as it pleased. And the terrifying part was, you didn't need the Black Death. There was no need for a grand plague sweeping across maps, or carts rolling through the village to collect the dead. All it took was a cut on your hand, a sip of well water that looked clear, or a wet cough that lingered too long, and your story could end. There were no hospitals, no emergency rooms, no one in a white coat. Only old Marjorie, who could boil a pot of leaves that smelled like used mop rags, and an aging monk whose prayers carried great enthusiasm but inconsistent results. People didn't understand germs. The word hadn't even been invented. Microscopes didn't exist. Everything you knew about sickness came from imagination, folklore, or the toothless whispers of your neighbor. Have a fever? Maybe you committed a sin. Swollen hand? Perhaps someone looked at you with envy. Persistent cough? Most likely a bad wind from the north carrying something foul. The term bad air made perfect sense in a world where there was nothing you could do to prove otherwise. So, you burned herbs in your room. Not because you liked the smell, but because you feared that if you didn't, the swelling might grow to the size of a cucumber. You tied a live chicken to your wound, not because you hated the chicken, but because someone claimed illness could transfer to the bird. No one asked how the chicken felt about it. You wore charms around your neck, a small bone, a strange piece of metal, sometimes even a fingernail from someone who had miraculously recovered. Unhygienic, ineffective, but in a world without antibiotics, the idea of wearing hope around your neck was better than having none at all. If you were brave enough, or desperate enough, there was someone in the village who knew how to draw blood, A man with a dull blade, a wooden bowl, and a confidence no one could explain. They believed your blood was unbalanced, so removing some might bring you back into harmony. Maybe it did. Maybe you fainted. But at least while unconscious, the pain disappeared. Some remedies were even stranger, from rubbing moldy bread on ulcers to sucking on roasted root stones, or even drinking cow urine. No one ever said medieval people lacked creativity. They were simply creative without verification. If you grew too weak, you lay down. On a straw bed, beneath a blanket as heavy as wet bricks, you sweated, groaned, drifted. Someone would boil herbs. Someone would whisper prayers. If you were lucky, old Marjorie might sit beside you, laying damp leaves on your skin while telling stories, like the time she nearly died of a toothache and survived by sneezing 3 times in a row. You didn't know if you'd live, but you lay there, hoping. Not a triumphant, dazzling hope, just a tired kind, that maybe tomorrow you'd feel a little less cold, that maybe the cough would ease, that maybe you could stand and fetch water without the stars spinning around your head. Sometimes you pulled through. You recovered, pale as flour, blinking like someone who just wrestled a bear and got let go. People would look at you, smile gently. There was no grand celebration, just an extra serving of soup, a cup of watered-down wine, and a joke like, "Well, looks like the chicken didn't die from sucking up your sickness after all." And if you didn't make it, things unfolded quietly. A candle lit. A prayer whispered. No coffin, just a sackcloth, a shallow grave, and a few stones piled on top to keep the stray dogs from getting too curious. Illness never truly left. It simply changed shapes. Like a veteran actor in a play no one asked to watch. Today, it was a fever. Tomorrow, a cough. Next week, a purple bruise on the foot. And all year long, you lived in a kind of quiet alertness, as if death were sitting just outside your door, politely knocking each time you forgot to wear your hat in the wind. If you thought illness before was already bad, then the Black Death came to prove the world could always get worse. And it didn't knock. It barged in. You didn't see it right away. Just a strange swelling on someone's neck. Then the fever came. Not the kind you'd seen before, but a fever that made their eyes lose focus, their hands tremble like they were possessed. Then blood. Not bright red like in heroic tales, but dark, bubbling black, as if the body was trying to expel itself from within. They died. Quickly. Sometimes in a few days. Sometimes just hours after the first cough. They sweated, moaned, spoke strange things, and then fell silent. The church bell, the symbol of life, of rhythm in the village, stopped ringing. Not because someone forgot, but because no one had the strength to pull the rope. The bell rope hung limp, like the hair of someone too tired to tie it back. Some people fled. They took their chickens, their bread, and a hope as thin as the skin on a newborn's forehead. But the sickness ran faster. It was already everywhere. In the wind, in the water, in glances, and even in the fearful whispers that stirred at midnight. The church, the guide, the pillar, this time, panicked. They said it was punishment. For sin, for pride, for eating meat on a Friday, or for sleeping through Mass. Some believed, and began whipping their backs in self-punishment. Some didn't believe, but whipped anyway, just in case God was watching, and maybe, just maybe, keeping score. You prayed, not because you believed the prayer would save you, but because there was nothing else left to do. You lit candles, even though the wax was running low. You avoided the eyes of strangers, afraid that even a glance could carry the disease. The priest, once the image of steadiness, now coughed too. He still raised the cross, but his hands shook so badly you weren't sure if it was divine strength or just a fever. Around you, houses went quiet, a silence that wasn't natural. No roosters crowing, no children running, no one arguing about the fence, only the wind, and sometimes the faint sound of someone whispering, "I'm still alive." You learned to clean the homes of the dead. No ceremony, no flowers, just a cloth, a shovel, and a rushed prayer. There were mass graves, dug quickly, filled quickly. No one had the strength to mourn for long. And yet, something strange happened. You were still here. You, somehow, weren't coughing. No fever, no bubbling blood. You were still breathing. And so, you began to clean. First, sweeping the floor. Then, wiping the door. Then, burning herbs in the corners of your home, as if to chase away something nameless. You shared herbs, bundles of leaves, roots, bark, not because you were sure they worked, but because you needed to do something for someone. You whispered new prayers, not the rehearsed words of the church, but very human ones. "Please don't take my mother." Or, "I swear I won't sneak bread during Mass again." You didn't know if you were immune, lucky, or forgotten. But you were alive. And that, in these days, was a kind of miracle. You opened your door each morning, not to wait for the sun, but to see how many homes still had smoke rising. A burning stove meant a beating heart. The clank of a bucket at the well meant someone still needed water. You didn't celebrate. You didn't shout. You just continued, with a strange, stubborn, quiet strength. A strength that didn't come from training or unwavering faith, but from having no other choice but to keep living. If you've ever complained that your fridge is empty, then please step into the kitchen of a medieval peasant. Food here isn't joy. It certainly isn't art. It's a puzzle. And you are the one who has to solve it every single day. No skipping, no fast food delivery button. If you can't solve it, your stomach will speak up in a language far more persuasive than words. At the center of the house, and of your entire life, is the stew pot. Not the Instagram-worthy kind with tender beef, golden carrots, and sprigs of parsley, but something closer to the memory of a meal. This stew never really stops simmering. It clings to life like a debt to a lord, always bubbling, always hungry. You throw in cabbage, even if the core's gone a little yellow. A handful of dry beans, an onion, and if the heavens smile on you today, a scrap of bone, not to chew on, but to remind you that meat once existed. You boil everything until flavor isn't something you name anymore. It's something you recognize by familiarity alone. And the bread? Ah, yes, the bread. More tool than food. Made from rye, oats, or whatever was left at the bottom of the bin. Heavy, dense, and if you don't dunk it into the stew, it'll break your teeth before it keeps you alive. Sometimes dry bread serves as your plate. You eat the plate at the end of the meal, and you eat slowly, not for pleasure, but to stretch the last bite, like the fragile hope that there might be seconds. Spoiler, there usually aren't. And meat? Meat is a national event. When a pig is slaughtered, everyone gathers, not for celebration, but to strategize survival. Every part is used: salted meat, rendered fat, jowls for soup, intestines for sausage, even the blood for black pudding, which you try hard not to imagine in too much detail. Nothing is wasted. If you think nose-to-tail eating is a modern trend, you should see how people back then used breastbone and tail stubs. And what do you drink? Water? You're joking, right? Water is always suspicious. It might look clear, but it can quietly kill you. So, you drink light ale, called small ale. It has alcohol, but just enough to kill bacteria, not enough to make you sing after breakfast. Children drink it, adults drink it. The cow? Might as well give it a try. Vegetables are your comfort. They live in tiny backyard gardens, cared for like precious treasure. Onions, turnips, kale, garlic. No gloss, no glamour, but loyal. You eat from root to leaf. The peels are boiled, the tender bits saved, and every scrap is valued. Nothing is thrown away. Waste isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. Fruits are seasonal. If you're lucky, a few apples or wild plums. If not, you imagine their taste in your dreams. Sugar barely exists. You know what it is, but you're not sure you've ever tasted it. Honey is a luxury, guarded like a dowry. Spices? Sometimes yes, but usually no. A bit of sage or mint, not to make the food pretty, but to soothe your stomach. Ginger, cinnamon, pepper. They belong to faraway cities you can't reach, and those who went there never came back. You eat with family around the fire. One shared pot, a torn piece of bread, and eyes that ask, "Is there more?" No one complains. Complaining doesn't thicken the stew. Only silence remains. And gratitude, because at least today there's something to scoop. When there's a festival, a wedding, a saint's day, or someone finally marrying off the stubborn daughter, you might eat a chicken. There might be a pie, not soft and fluffy, but more like a meat box. Thick, dense, solid. And if there's spice in it, someone must have come back from the market with a pinch of cinnamon dust. And after all of that, you return to the old stew, the one that's fed you, though it's never quite satisfied you. It simmers, it persists, and it does not betray. Famine is not just hunger, It's when the fields betray you, when seeds refuse to sprout and hope becomes a luxury. You see it coming with spring. Too much rain or none at all. The stew grows thinner, the bread gets smaller, and the children stop asking about honey. The village falls silent. No more laughter, no more bickering. You boil weeds, mash roots, even chew bark. The animals grow thin. And then, so do you. You dream of feasts, but wake with an empty belly. Famine begins quietly. A harvest slightly off. A week of rain that never came. An unplanned frost. You don't panic. You run calculations in your head. How much barley is left in the jar? How many turnips haven't rotted? Maybe we can reduce our portions just a little, and it'll be fine. But then, a little becomes the new normal, and the four of you just sit silently by the fire, staring into bowls the color of fatigue. In the early days, you still hope. The steward might bring grain. The church might hand out stale loaves. People might share. Hunger comes slowly, so you wait for it. And when it finally arrives, it brings a question with it. Who will be the first to say it aloud? First, the meals skip, then scatter, then vanish. Families begin saving the best for the children. Small items are traded for grain. The hardest conversations begin. Should we grind the seed grain into flour, or should we save it for next season? Every choice is a gamble with life itself. You begin boiling greens you'd never considered food. You grind roots, stare at bark, and if you're quiet enough, you eat the hidden roots too. You learn which plants poison, which just cause cramps, and which will leave you sprinting for the privy. When the stomach stops growling, you start eyeing things that don't belong in cookbooks. Leather, wool, rats. Once, you caught yourself steeping a beeswax candle simply because it smelled like food. On days when no one speaks, dreams become magic. You dream of a roasted chicken leg, a soft crust of bread, a wooden table topped with cheese. You wake up, tongue dry, hands clinging to air, the hunger still clinging to your ribs, even in sleep. People move less. Children sit quiet by the fire. No stories, no questions. Silence wraps around the village. People avoid eye contact because sometimes a single glance feels like an accusation. And when the final rains return, no one rushes to sow. They move carefully. Each handful of seed is lifted like gold. Hands tremble, not from cold, but from the fear that one mistake could be fatal. Then, one day, the shoots appear. Just a few, but they're real. Families begin choosing who eats first, the youngest, the oldest, the frail. You wait your turn, maybe just a piece of bread, but enough to bring tears. When the first loaf is brought out, burnt underneath, crusty on top, you stare at it for a long moment before biting. In your mind, the smell of sweat, of dreams about roasted chicken, of nights you couldn't sleep. And as the crust cracks in your mouth, it's not flavor that speaks. It's memory. Famine doesn't vanish like a hand clap. It lingers, seeps into the cracks of your confidence. But when the soil is once again ready to count the sprouts, when effort begins to show even in the smallest tasks, you know you've survived. You still chew slowly, and every bite, dry, small, not remotely a feast, is sweeter than anything else. Because somewhere deep in your gut, that hunger still whispers, reminding you there were days when there was nothing to chew. And now, in this season of abundance, as the story replays in your mind, you sit before a simple loaf of bread. But you see more than that. You see a lesson in survival. That there were days when simply being full was a miracle. Night isn't an ending. It is its own chapter, a sacred part of the quiet rhythm of village life. When the sun retreats and darkness spills over the thatched roof, you don't simply go to sleep. You step into a different world, one where everything slows down, blurs slightly, yet somehow feels clearer in a strange way. You don't sleep through the night. People in the past knew nothing of alarm clocks or the uninterrupted 8-hour sleep cycle. You sleep twice, a short slumber after dinner, called the first sleep. When the sun fully disappears, you lie down beside the haystack, wrap yourself in a heavy wool blanket, and let the crackling of the hearth lull you into dreams. It is a hazy sleep, filled with vivid images, golden wheat fields, departed loved ones, or sometimes a wolf with eyes glowing like embers. You wake in the middle of the night, not from a nightmare or the sound of a clock, but because your body is used to it. Called the watch, it's when you stir the coals in the fireplace, sip a little water or light ale, whisper a few quiet prayers, or even murmur to the person lying next to you. It's the hour when little stories are shared, worries exchanged, and lonely souls feel a bit less alone. Then you lie back down, this time for the second sleep, deeper, heavier, as if your body knows this is the part needed to heal the pains of the day. And in that darkness, when all sounds settle, you hope that this dream will be gentler, that you won't see faceless strangers, won't taste blood, won't hear voices calling from the forest's edge. You don't sleep alone. No one sleeps alone. In that tiny house, everyone is together. Father, mother, children, grandparents, even the cow, the chickens, and sometimes a sickly goat. Not because there's no space, but because warmth is more precious than gold. You learn how to turn without kicking someone else, how to interpret snoring as the background music of sleep. There are no plush blankets or feathered pillows, only wool, hay, and each other's breath. The night is cold, and each body is a wall against the wind. You feel life in the rhythm of breath, in sleep-talk murmurs, in the cat curling into your chest. It may not even be your cat, but who cares if it's warm? Dreams aren't private things. They carry omens, whispered to each other the next morning. If you dream of a field of wheat, it means a good harvest. If you see snakes, illness is coming. If you fly through the air, your spirit is being warned. Dreams become prophecies, the only tool you have to understand what cannot be controlled, the future. And night is not safe. Wolves lurk from the deep woods, sometimes creeping into the pens. Thieves, rare but real, seek out houses with faint flickering light, hoping to snatch some grain or a tool. But worst of all are the things without shape, wandering souls, ghosts of the unrested, footsteps with no body on the roof. You don't name them, because to name them is to invite them. So you do what you can. You hang dried herbs by the door, mugwort, rosemary, to ward off evil. You place a bowl of water near the hearth, hoping wandering spirits will see their reflection and retreat. You make the sign of the cross on your child's forehead, praying they won't be taken in the night. And you hope that when you close your eyes, you'll open them again at dawn. The sounds of night aren't silence. They are wind slipping through door cracks, the groan of wooden floors under cold, the cow turning over, and the creak of an old chest. Sometimes it's mice, sometimes strange birds calling from the woods, and sometimes, far off, a long, lonely howl that makes you curl deeper into your blanket. But in all that, there is something profoundly human. That you are alive in a fragile world, surrounded by others who are also afraid, who are also hopeful, and who are all hiding from the dark by clinging to one another's warmth. And that, in its simplicity, is strength. Night in the village isn't just a time to sleep. It is a ritual, a moment when you most clearly feel that you are alive. No need for lights, no need for noise, just warmth, a little trust, and dreams, however blurry, that are still where you find the rest of yourself. Your house wasn't designed by an architect, nor was there ever a blueprint. It was built from experience, caution, and a touch of desperation. The walls are made of mud mixed with straw, dried under the sun, and replastered with fresh mud whenever the rainy season comes. Every crack, every bump on those walls is a scar left by time. Not beautiful, not even, but real. The roof is thatched with straw, each dry bundle tied tight and layered. When first built, it was golden like sunlight. From afar, it looked like a small halo amidst the gloomy fields. But weather doesn't forgive freshness. Rain pours, wind screams, birds come to scavenge, and soon the roof fades, sags like a hunched back. When it rains, water seeps through every crevice, dripping exactly onto the spot where you just placed your bed the night before. The floor is dirt, hard as stone in the dry season, mushy like porridge during the rains. You've tried laying down straw, lining with stone, even tamping it with a wooden post. But no matter what, by winter it's still freezing and riddled with spiderweb-like cracks. But you're used to it. Your bare feet have learned how to find the driest spots, sometimes guided purely by instinct. There's no glass in the windows. They're just holes in the wall, covered by warped wooden shutters. They never close snugly, never open smoothly, and always creak when the wind is strong. But they're also where you stare out on sleepless nights, watching the grass sway, watching mist drift past like gentle ghosts. Inside the house, there's no living room, no dining room, no separate bedrooms. Everything is wrapped into one space, where you eat, sleep, work, and sometimes argue. The hearth sits in the center, the heart of the home, where the stew always simmers and the fire always burns, even if it's only twigs. Smoke curls through the thatched roof, through cracks in the ceiling, soaking into your clothes, your hair, and even your dreams. Furnishings are few, very few. A rugged wooden table built by your father from a fallen tree after the storm. A long bench where children sleep piled together in winter. Maybe you have a chest, if you're lucky, where family treasures are kept, an old wedding dress, a silver coin, a half-finished piece of embroidered cloth. None of it holds market value, but each carries its own weight in your heart. The bed, if you can call it that, is just a wooden frame stuffed with straw or dry grass. You replace the straw every season, but it still rustles every time you turn over. There are no pillows. Blankets are wool, rough and heavy, usually still damp from the last wash 2 weeks ago. But you don't complain, because when wind howls through the cracks, when cold dew creeps in, that old blanket is the last border between you and the outside world. There's a kind of silent knowledge you gain over years of living here. You know exactly where the wind sneaks in, and whether to block it with a burlap sack or an old cloak. You know which corner of the room gets the afternoon sun, and place your vegetable basket there to dry. You know which beam can bear the weight of meat, and which will snap if you try. Everything in the house bears your imprint, from the handprint on the wall from when you were a child, to the scratch on the bench where the paring knife once slipped. And when a guest, rare as they are, walks in, they see poverty, they see plainness. But you see life, you see effort, you see love hiding in every crack. You live among the scent of smoke, dry grass, and smoked meat, if the season is lucky. You share space with loved ones, with animals, with dust, and with time. When night falls, you sit near the hearth, stir the stew, and listen to the crackle of coals, like whispers from the earth, reminding you that today you survived again. This house doesn't shield against every gust of wind. It doesn't block every drop of rain. But it's the place you return to every day, where you know each creak belongs to someone, and every worn spot has a story, where you've learned to live with little and to treasure every bit. Not perfect, not grand, but a home in the deepest and truest sense of the word. You don't own the land, even though you till it. The land belongs to the Lord, who lives in the big house on the hill, eating food you wouldn't dare to dream of. You are a serf, bound to the soil, owing labor, grain, and even respect. The steward keeps track of everything: the grain you owe, the eggs you've delivered. Want to get married? Pay a fee. Want to leave? Ask for permission, and pay another fee. The system is harsh, but stable. You know what you owe, and you do it because there's no other choice. Sometimes the Lord grants a feast day, but it's never enough to balance the scales. On feast days, you get to rest, at least from the fields. You wear your best clothes, meaning the least torn, go to church, and listen to the priest preach in Latin, a language you don't understand. Then there's a meal, some baked bread, sometimes even meat, and a few village games. You laugh, you dance, and for a fleeting moment, you forget where you fall in the great chain. But then the sky darkens, and the next morning you're back in the fields, feet in the mud, back bent low, as if the holiday never happened. You have no rights, but you do have laws. unwritten laws passed through stories, songs, and glances. Children know not to sneak food from the grain stores. Adults know not to touch the neighbor's cow, even if it strays into your yard. Justice here doesn't come from a court. It comes from shame and the silent stares of the community. If someone does wrong, they know, because the entire village knows. You learn to stay out of trouble by staying quiet, keeping your head down, pretending not to see. Someone steals a bundle of firewood? No one says a word. But next time, they're not invited to the communal meal. Someone accidentally sets fire to a field? They'll harvest the whole season with whispers trailing behind them. Your world is small, but its memory is long. You don't know much about the kingdom, the king, or his decrees. Those things are too distant, too abstract. All you see is the tax collector on horseback, holding a list, his eyes unwilling to negotiate. You give away the best part of your harvest, keep the coarsest for yourself. But at least you still have something. If you resist, they don't have to beat you. They just add your name to a special list, and next time, there's no land for you. Your children grow up within this system. They learn to walk through mud before they learn to speak. They know the names of weeds before they know their own. You teach them with your hands, your eyes, and by letting them sit on your shoulders to look out over the fields. They don't ask why things are the way they are, because they've never known anything different. To them, this is the world. And in that moment, when you watch your child gnaw on a piece of dry bread beneath the sunset, you feel something close to happiness. You know life isn't fair, but you also know it has rhythm, like the creaking of a water wheel, the call of cattle in the evening, the footsteps of people returning after a long day. You find comfort in the repetition, because it means you're still here, still going. On those rare, peaceful nights, when the rain holds off, the chickens sleep quietly, and no one's coughing from the cold, you look up at the sky. Not to wish on falling stars, just to remember that there is something vast, something bright, beyond the mud walls of your home. Then you turn back inside, throw another log on the fire, and whisper an old tale to your children before they drift off to sleep. You don't need books to record your life. You etch it into the soil, into calloused hands, into the mud beneath your toenails. You won't leave behind monuments, but you'll leave behind seeds in the earth and in the ones who come after you. And maybe that's how you endure, not through fame, but through roots. So when someone speaks of the Middle Ages, don't only mention kings, knights, or castles. Remember you, the nameless farmer, living quietly but resiliently, where every meal was a small miracle and every day survived was a victory. You don't rebel, not because you're weak, but because you're realistic. Rebellion means losing everything: land, home, family. But you resist in your own way, hiding a chicken from the ledger, burying a sack of grain in the ground, or whispering satirical songs about the Lord. You adapt, barter, and survive. The church teaches that suffering is holy, that heaven awaits. You're not so sure, but you still kneel, still cross yourself, because a world without order is even more terrifying. Every morning, you walk past the fields you don't own, holding the hoe your father once used, bowing your head to accept what cannot be changed. But inside, you still hold on to one thing, the thought that tomorrow might be better than today, that your children might grow up with even a sliver of hope. Your resistance doesn't come in the form of swords or spears. It lives in your patience. The calluses on your hands and the hunch in your back are your quiet medals. At the market, one of the rare times you're allowed to leave the village, you overhear rumors. The king is far away, the war is somewhere else, and perhaps a lord was overthrown for taxing too harshly. You don't speak, you just remember. A part of you wants to believe justice exists, that one day the wicked will be punished. But most of the time, all you wish for is a harvest that doesn't fail. On the rare nights when the moon is full, you and your neighbors gather by the fire, whispering old stories about a grandfather who once saved a soldier in war, or a grandmother who could heal with nothing but dried flowers. The tales seem small, but they keep the fire in your heart burning. You don't have books or schools, but you remember every word, every detail. Your knowledge is woven by mouth, by memory, and by survival. You teach your children everything you know, not just how to plant seeds or mend a fence, but how to read the sky for rain, how to speak in circles around the steward, how to tell the difference between a dangerous cough and an empty threat from the church. Children are hope, young shoots sprouting from dry soil, and you, hardened as you are, still soften when they fall asleep in your arms, dreaming of a world wider than this muddy village. You have dreams, but they're not grand. You dream your children outlive you, your partner recovers from illness, and the crops this year don't go moldy. You dream of a day when you're full and no one knocks on your door to collect a debt. Your dreams are small, but never insignificant, because in this world, simply surviving is already a triumph. Every new season is a test. You wait for rain, count frost days, and listen for the season's first bird song. You don't have a calendar, but you have the trees, the wind, and the aches in your bones as reminders. You are history's ledger written in flesh, every scar a winter, every wrinkle a harvest. You don't expect anyone to remember you. You know your name won't be written in any book, but you hope your children will. Remember your hands gripping the hoe, the way you wiped their faces with your sleeve, the way you said, "Hold on, this too shall pass." You don't live to be remembered. You live so that others can go on living, and at the end of the day, when the sun slips behind the hill, you return to your thatched roof home, mud caked to your legs, arms aching with weariness. You wash your face in cold water, eat the same old stew, and watch the children laugh in the firelight. You are tired, but you are still alive. You're not powerful, not famous, but you are resilient. And that is enough to carry you into one more day. That is your resistance, not loud, not glorious, but so deep that the very system depends on you to survive. You are the foundation, the forgotten piece, the one holding the world in place, even though it was never meant to be yours. And in that silence, you continue, dreaming, surviving, resisting, in your own way. The miracle isn't that you didn't rebel, it's that you survived. You kept the stories, the songs, and the remedies no one ever wrote down. You taught your children how to till the soil, how to pray, how to bury the dead. You built a world that was more enduring, more constant than kings. Every harvest, every loaf of bread, every candle lit was a victory. You didn't own the land, but the land remembered your hands. Survival, with all its weight, was your quiet revolution. And then you grew old. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but little by little. A joint that creaked, a night of sleep that never quite came, a winter that chilled you all the way to the bone. You didn't have a mirror, but you knew time had touched you, in your children's eyes, in the quiet deference of neighbors, in the way you could no longer climb the roof. Growing old wasn't rest. It was the rhythm of life slowing down, giving you time to really see the early bloom of cauliflower, to hear each morning bird call, to notice every crack forming in your mud brick wall. You passed on everything you knew, not through books, but through held hands, through whispers by the fire, through letting the little ones walk beside you as you plowed, fed the hens, gathered firewood. Your memory wasn't shelved in a library, it lived in repeated actions. You lived on in your grandchildren, in the way they bundled grain, in how they sliced bread, in how they bowed their heads at the altar. In a world with no wills, no monuments, memory was the only thing that never died. You never visited a city, never saw the sea, never understood maps. But you had seen rainbows through the mist, had heard owls call out at midnight, had breathed in the scent of soil after the season's first rain. You had loved, quietly and faithfully, not with poems or silver rings, but by splitting the last spoon of stew in the pot, by mending the roof before the storm hit, by brushing hands as you passed in the courtyard. You had lost family, friends, sometimes hope, and yet you went on. Your world was small, but never simple. It was a web of duties, of belief, of endurance. You didn't leave behind fame or fortune, but you left behind a village still standing, a tradition still breathing, a piece of land not forgotten. You were the foundation, uncelebrated but irreplaceable. And when the time came, you lay down, not in a grand bed, but on the familiar straw, between the sound of wind and the quiet cluck of hens. There was no priest reciting final rites, no flags, no fanfare. But there were hands holding yours. There were whispered prayers, and there were eyes watching still, learning how to live and how to die from you. They will speak of you, not in books, but in stories shared by the hearth, on a winter's night, as the wind howls and the fire glows red. You didn't rise up, but you lived. And in a world this fragile, this unforgiving, that alone is enough to be called a miracle. When you lie down, surrounded by snores, wood smoke, and darkness, you feel a strange peace. Not because life is easy, but because you've made it through another day. Your village is small, but it is enough. Enough gossip, enough passing joy, enough hope to go on. History may forget you, but you are the thread that holds the world together. Close your eyes. Let the wind whisper through the thatched roof and carry you into sleep. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, and you will begin again. That is life, and that is enough. Each day is a closed circle. No hurry, no surprises, just steady repetition. You don't have a calendar or a clock, but you know the seasons by the color of the sky, the sound of birds, and the pulse of the earth beneath your feet. When the cow bellows at dawn, when the mist melts from the trees, you rise again, shoulders aching, but your feet move forward. No one calls you a hero, but who needs titles when you're keeping rhythm for an entire world? With every step through the mud, you continue a tradition hundreds of years old, not through books, but through hands and memory. Lullabies, stories by the fire, these are your legacy, needing no stone to endure. You pass on how to find wild honey, how to build a fence with bare hands, how to count stars to predict weather. Your knowledge comes without certificates, but it keeps people alive. And even when snow falls or floods wash the harvest away, you don't give up. You patch the roof with your hands, dry wet wood beside the hearth, and tell the child that next year will be better. Because hope is the last thing you have, and the only thing no one can take from you. You may not know the world map, but you know every tree root around your village. You've never read Shakespeare, but you know proverbs that make children laugh. You don't own an hourglass, but you know when to sow and when to brace for the storm. At night, as the last glow from the fire fades, you feel your own breath slow, as if life gives you a pause, a moment to rest. You look around. Your son holds a small chicken in his hands. Your wife chuckles softly in her sleep, dreaming of something pleasant. The cat curls next to the basket of firewood. This is your world, and you ask for nothing more. You don't write history, but you live in every gap between the lines. When they record the names of kings, they forget those who planted the grain to feed their armies. When books tell of war, they leave out those who gathered herbs to heal the wounded. But you know, each drop of your sweat is the foundation beneath the palace walls. If there's anything that makes you special, it is this. You keep going. You don't stop. You don't demand. You simply live, day by day, season by season, as your ancestors did. In that is a quiet belief that if you work hard enough and remain kind enough, the world won't fall apart. And on rainy nights, when the roof leaks and the wind howls through the shutters, you still smile. Not because you're fearless, but because you've made peace with the dark. You know that no matter what, light will return in the morning. And when it does, you will rise, light the fire, wash your face with cold water, and begin again. No music needed, no parade, just one heartbeat, steady, enduring, like you. You are not grand, but you are the reason all things grand can exist, and that is a miracle no one can take from you. Good night. If this story brought you peace, please like and subscribe. In the comments, Let me know where you're listening from. And if you're already asleep, congratulations. You're dreaming of a time when people lived slower, but deeper. And you, dear friend, are part of that story. And you, the one listening to these words, thank you for walking this part of the journey with me. If something in this story made your heart pause, or simply helped you unwind before sleep, take a second to click like and subscribe. But only if you truly feel it's worth it. I'm not chasing numbers. I'm looking for kindred spirits. In the comments, let me know where you're listening from. Are you in the United States? And what time is it where you are right now? It's a beautiful thought that somewhere else in the world, someone is also slowing their breath, turning off the lights, and sharing this quiet space with me.